The morning sun was just beginning to peek over the rooftops, casting long, sleepy shadows across the living room floor. But for the 8-year-old boy sitting on the edge of the sofa, there was no sleepiness in his body, only a dull, heavy feeling in his stomach. From outside, through the open window, came the sound he loved most in the world, the distinct thwack of a baseball hitting a wooden bat, followed by a chorus of happy shouts. His friends were already at the park, playing the game they had invented yesterday. He could almost smell the freshly cut grass and feel the dusty leather of a baseball in his own hand. Instead, all he could feel was the scratchy wool of his new suit and the gentle but firm pressure of his mother's hands adjusting his tie. The silk felt like a small, tight hand wrapped around his neck. "Stand up straight." "Leo," she said, her voice soft but with an edge like a tiny hidden knife. "Let me look at you." He stood as tall as he could, his small frame feeling lost in the stiff, dark fabric. His mother circled him like a hawk inspecting its prey, her eyes darting from his polished shoes to his neatly combed hair. She tugged at the sleeves of his jacket and smoothed the non-existent crease on his shoulder. Her hands were always busy, always fixing, always perfecting. "You look wonderful. A true musician." She smiled, but the smile didn't quite reach her eyes. It was a smile for an audience. It's not just for him. His father was standing in the doorway to the kitchen, holding a cup of coffee. He hadn't said much all morning. He just watched, his face a mixture of pride and something else the boy couldn't quite name then, but would later understand as pity. He gave his son a small, almost invisible thumbs up, a secret gesture of support between the two of them. The boy tried to smile back, but it felt like his face was made of wood. "This is just the beginning. You know," his mother continued, her voice taking on that dreamy, faraway quality it always did when she talked about his future. "Today's just the regional competition. But one day you'll play in the big halls. People will come from all over just to hear you." She wasn't looking at him anymore. She was looking through him at some imaginary stage filled with lights and applause. He was just the vessel for her dream, a dream she had once had for herself, a dream that had gotten lost somewhere along the way. He knew this because she had told him once, late at night when she thought he was asleep. She had played the piano too, but not like him. She'd had to quit. Her family hadn't had the money. Now, she poured all of that lost hope into him. He remembered when the piano first came into their lives. It wasn't the big gleaming black monster that sat in the corner now. It had started with a small, second-hand keyboard his father had found at a garage sale. It was just a toy to him at first. He loved pressing the buttons and making the silly robot sounds. But then, one afternoon, he found himself plunking out the melody to a cartoon show he had watched that morning. He didn't know how to read music. He just knew where the notes were supposed to be. His mother had walked in, stopped dead in her tracks, and her eyes had gone wide with a kind of fierce, shocking light. That was the moment everything changed. A month later, the big black piano arrived. It was beautiful and terrifying. It took up an entire corner of the living room, its polished surface reflecting the room like a dark, still lake. The first few weeks were fun. His mother sat with him, her hands guiding his, showing him how to press the keys just so. They laughed when he made a mistake. But the laughter didn't last long. Soon, the fun was replaced by practice. 2 hours every single day. After school, before dinner, when the sun was still shining and the world outside was calling his name. "Your friends can wait," she would say, her voice losing its softness. Talent is a gift, but it's a gift that has to be unwrapped every single day with hard work. He thought of one particular Tuesday, a few months ago. It had been raining, and the drops raced down the window pane like tiny, transparent athletes. He was supposed to be learning a difficult passage in a new song, a series of fast, jumpy notes that his fingers refused to learn. His mother sat beside him on the bench, her foot tapping out a relentless, impatient rhythm on the floor. Every time he messed up, she would let out a small, sharp sigh. No, not like that. The C sharp comes after the G again, from the top." He tried again, his small fingers fumbling and slipping on the ivory keys. The wrong note hung in the air like a sour smell. Again, His eyes started to burn with frustration. He could hear his friends in their house next door laughing and playing a board game. He wanted to be there more than anything. He wanted to stop playing the song. This song that felt like a puzzle with a missing piece. A single hot tear escaped and rolled down his cheek, dropping silently onto the keyboard with a soft, sad plink. His mother saw it. She didn't hug him or tell him it was okay. She just pointed to the sheet music. "The feeling doesn't matter," she said, her voice flat. "The notes matter." Again. And so it went. The piano, which had once been a source of magic and wonder, had become a beautiful monster. It was a chore. A daily test. He was always afraid of failing. The music he was supposed to play for the competition today felt less like a song and more like a wall of black and white bricks he had to climb, hand over hand, without ever looking down. It was technically impressive, full of fast runs and loud chords. All the other parents would be impressed. But to him, it had no soul. It was just noise. The only music he still loved was the simple, silly tunes he made up for himself, the ones he would play softly when his mother wasn't home. Oh, melodies that sounded like sunshine and running through a sprinkler. He never played those for her. He knew they wouldn't be good enough. "All right, it's time to go," his mother said, snapping him back to the present. She grabbed his jacket from the back of a chair. He looked at his reflection in the dark screen of the television. The boy staring back at him looked like a stranger. A small, serious man in a miniature suit with a pale face and eyes that held no light. He took a deep breath, the air catching in his throat. He could still hear his friends playing outside, a distant, joyful sound that belonged to another life. He stood up, his legs feeling like lead, and let his mother lead him toward the door, toward the car, toward the silent stage that was waiting for him. The car ride felt longer than it actually was. The boy sat in the back, his hands folded neatly in his lap, just like his mother had taught him. He watched the world go by through the window, a blur of green trees and gray buildings. He tried to spot a baseball field, a park, anything that looked like fun. But the streets were full of serious-looking adults walking quickly with briefcases and coffee cups. His mother was in the front passenger seat, and he could see her in the rearview mirror. She kept checking her reflection, smoothing her eyebrows and pressing her lips together. Every few seconds, she would tap her fingers on the dashboard, a nervous, rhythmic beat that matched the thumping in his own chest. His father was driving, his hands steady on the wheel. He tried to make small talk. "Looks like it might rain later. Good day to be inside, huh?" he said, his voice a little too cheerful. His mother didn't answer. She just kept staring straight ahead. When they finally pulled up to the university auditorium, the boy's breath caught in his throat. It was a huge building made of old stone with giant columns and a lot of steps. It looked like a place for important grown-ups, not for kids. Inside, it was even bigger. The ceiling was so high, it felt like the sky, and the floor was shiny marble that made their shoes squeak with every step. The air was thick with a mix of smells: old wood, floor wax, and the sweet flowery perfume of a dozen different mothers. And the sounds. It was like a symphony of nervousness. From behind closed doors, he could hear the faint, clear notes of a flute, the angry buzz of a violin being tuned, and the deep, rumbling chords of a piano. It was all noise, and it all felt like it was pressing in on him. They walked down a long hallway lined with pictures of serious-looking men and women from years ago, all holding instruments. He saw other children, and for the first time, he felt truly alone. There was a girl about his age, pacing back and forth in a small circle, her eyes wide as she flipped through a giant stack of sheet music. Her mother followed her, whispering things he couldn't hear. There was a boy who looked a little older, leaning against a wall with his arms crossed, looking completely bored. His father was talking to another man, loudly saying things like, "Oh yes, he's a natural. Barely has to practice." The boy felt a pang of something. He wasn't like the frantic girl, and he definitely wasn't like the natural boy. He had to practice. Every single day. He saw a little girl with pigtails crying softly into her mother's shoulder, and he wished he could do that too. He wished his mother would just hug him and say they could go home, but he knew she wouldn't. His mother found a sign that said "Contestants Waiting Area" and pointed him toward a curtained-off section of the lobby. Inside, There were rows of folding chairs, most of them already filled with more kids and their parents. The air was even more tense here. It was quiet, but not a peaceful quiet. It was a heavy, waiting quiet. A man with a clipboard stood by a door that led to the stage. Every so often, he would call out a name, and a child would stand up and walk through the door, disappearing into the light. The boy sat down on a hard plastic chair between his parents. His mother immediately took his hand. Her palm was sweaty and cold, and she held on too tight. His father just put a warm, heavy hand on his shoulder, a silent, steady presence. Time seemed to stretch and slow down. He watched the door. A tall girl with a long braid went in. A few minutes later, they could hear the muffled sound of beautiful, fast piano music, followed by applause. She came back out, her face flushed with a proud smile. A small, nervous-looking boy went in. They heard a few shaky notes, a long pause, then some more slow, careful music. He came out with his head down. The boy felt his stomach twist into a tight knot. Which one would he be? He tried to think about the music he was supposed to play. He tried to picture the notes on the page in his head, black dots marching in a perfect, orderly line. But the image was blurry. Instead, he thought about the baseball game. He imagined the feel of the bat hitting the ball right in the sweet spot, the satisfying crack echoing through the park. He imagined running the bases, his friends cheering for him. A small smile touched his lips. "Leo," his mother whispered, squeezing his hand. "Focus. Don't think about anything else." The smile vanished. He was back in the hard chair, in the stuffy room, with the weight of her expectations pressing down on him. And then the man with the clipboard looked at his list, and then up into the waiting area. His voice was loud and clear. "Leo, number 23. It felt like an electric shock. His whole body went rigid. His mother let go of his hand and stood up, straightening his jacket for the 100th time that day. She knelt down in front of him, so her eyes were level with his. Her face was very serious, her eyes burning with an intense, almost scary light. "Make us proud," she whispered. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. It was the most important thing she had ever said to him. He just nodded, his throat too tight to speak. His father gave his shoulder a final firm squeeze. "You've got this," he said, his voice low and calm. He stood up and walked toward the man with the clipboard, his legs feeling like they were made of rubber. The man gave him a small, sympathetic smile and pointed toward the door. "Good luck, son." He pushed through the heavy velvet curtain and was immediately blinded by a wall of light. It was so bright he couldn't see anything at first. He put a hand up to shield his eyes. The floor was different here, too soft and spongy, like a running track. He could feel the heat from the big stage lights beating down on his face. The man had told him to walk to the center of the stage, to the piano. It was the longest walk of his life. Every step echoed in the sudden, immense silence. He was terrified he would trip on his own feet. He kept his eyes down, watching his black shoes move one in front of the other on the black floor. Finally, he reached the piano. It was bigger and shinier than his at home. It was a monster, a beautiful black beast, with its lid propped open, showing off all its strings and keys. The bench was a simple, polished piece of wood. He carefully pulled it out, the sound of its legs scraping across the floor, seeming as loud as a thunderclap in the quiet hall. He sat down. It was cold and hard. He placed his fingers on the keys, his hands shaking just a little. The ivory felt smooth and cool under his fingertips. Now that his eyes had adjusted, he looked out. The lights were so bright that the audience was just a dark, empty space. He couldn't see faces, just shapes, a sea of shadows. It was like he was alone on a small island in the middle of a huge black ocean. He searched for his parents, a lifeline in the darkness. He scanned the front row, and then he saw them. His father was there, and he was giving him a small, secret thumbs up, just like he had done at home. It was a tiny, almost invisible gesture, but it made the boy's shoulders relax just a little. But then he saw his mother. She was leaning so far forward he thought she might fall out of her seat. Her hands were clasped together in her lap, so tightly that her knuckles were white. Her face was a mask of pure hope and pure fear, all mixed into one. It wasn't a comforting look. It was a look that said, "Everything depends on this." He took a deep, shaky breath and let it out slowly. He could feel the eyes of hundreds of people on him, even if he couldn't see them. He could feel their expectations, their judgment. The room was completely, utterly silent. It was a waiting silence, a listening silence. It was the quietest place he had ever been. And in that silence, with the weight of his mother's dreams and the heat of the lights on his neck, he realized he had forgotten how to start. His fingers were poised, just as his mother had taught him 1,000 times, curved like they were holding a small ball, ready. His right hand hovered over the keys, ready to press down on the first chord, a big, bold C major that was supposed to fill the hall with confidence. He took a breath, just like they'd practiced. A slow breath in and a steady breath out. The first beat of silence passed. It was an okay silence. It was the kind of quiet that comes before something important happens. The audience was listening. The judges were waiting. It was all part of the performance. He told himself this. He could do this. He tried to call the music to his mind. He closed his eyes for just a second, picturing the sheet music on the stand at home. The first line, the notes were like little black ants marching up the staff. He knew them. He knew them so well he could play them in his sleep. But now, when he looked for them in his head, they were just shapes. They had no meaning. The lines were just lines. The dots were just dots. The music, the sound that was supposed to come from those dots, was gone. It was like trying to remember a dream after you've woken up. You know you had it. You know it was there. But all that's left is a feeling. A ghost of an idea. A second beat of silence passed. It was a little longer now. A little heavier. He could feel a tiny drop of sweat make its way down his temple. It was cold. His heart, which had been thumping steadily before, now started to beat faster. A hard, frantic rhythm against his ribs. Thump, thump, thump. It was so loud he was sure everyone in the dark room could hear it. He tried to swallow, but his mouth was dry, like it was full of cotton. His fingers, which had been so perfectly curved, started to feel stiff and foreign. They were his fingers, but they felt like they belonged to someone else. Someone who didn't know how to play the piano. The silence in the room was changing. It was no longer a patient, waiting silence. It was becoming an active thing. It was pressing in on him from all sides. It was no longer empty. It was full of questions. What is he waiting for? Is he nervous? Did he forget? He could feel a shift in the energy of the room. The dark shapes of the audience seemed to lean forward, as a collective whole. The air grew thick and stuffy. He heard a tiny sound from the back of the hall, a cough. It wasn't a loud cough, but in the crushing silence it sounded like a shout. It broke the spell, and it made him jump. His fingers slipped on the keys, playing a discordant cluster of notes that was ugly and wrong. A small gasp rippled through the audience. Panic, cold and sharp, shot through him. This was bad. This was very, very bad. He had to start. He had to start now. He stared down at the black and white keys, but they were starting to blur together. The white keys were a long white desert. The black keys were like a row of sharp teeth. He knew the first note was a C. He was sure of it. His thumb was supposed to come down right. Here, he told his thumb to move. He commanded it. Press the key. Just press it. But his hand wouldn't listen. It was frozen, suspended over the keyboard, trembling slightly. His mind was screaming at his body, but it was like the connection had been cut. He was a ghost in his own body, a helpless passenger. He risked a glance toward the front row, toward his parents. He needed a lifeline. He needed to see his father's calm face, his secret thumbs up. But his eyes found his mother first. Her face, which had been a mask of intense hope, was now crumbling. He saw the confusion first, a little wrinkle appearing between her eyebrows. She didn't understand. Then, as the silence stretched on for another agonizing second, he saw the dawning horror. Her lips parted slightly. Her eyes, which had been burning with ambition, now widened with a different kind of fire, the fire of pure, painful embarrassment. It was the look of a person watching their worst fear come true. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It was something much, much worse. It was a deep, aching disappointment that was so strong he could feel it all the way across the stage. It hit him like a physical blow. In that moment, the shame was overwhelming. It was a hot, suffocating wave that washed over him, from the top of his head to the soles of his feet. He wasn't just failing a competition. He wasn't just forgetting a song. He was breaking her heart. He was destroying her dream. All those hours of practice, all the missed baseball games, all the stern corrections and frustrated sighs had all led to this. To this moment, to this terrible heavy silence, to the look on his mother's face. He had let her down. He had let everyone down. He was a failure. The thought of staying on that bench for one more second was impossible. The thought of trying to fumble through the song, of hitting wrong notes and stopping and starting, is more humiliating than just stopping now. The shame was a physical weight, and he couldn't hold it up anymore. He had to escape. He had to get away from the lights, away from the silent, watching eyes, away from his mother's face. His body made the decision before his mind did. His hands, which had been frozen, suddenly came to life. But they didn't go to the keys. They dropped to his sides. He leaned forward, his face inches from the microphone. He could see his own terrified reflection in its shiny surface. He opened his mouth, but only a tiny squeak came out. He cleared his throat and tried again, his voice a hoarse, shaky whisper. "I'm sorry." The words hung in the air for a second, fragile and pathetic. Then he pushed the bench back. The scraping sound of its wooden legs against the floor of the stage was the loudest, most awful noise he had ever heard. It was the sound of his defeat. He stood up quickly, his legs feeling wobbly and weak. He didn't look at the audience. He didn't look at the judges. He kept his eyes fixed on the heavy velvet curtain at the side of the stage, the dark, safe space that promised escape. He walked, not ran, toward it. Each step was a monumental effort. He could feel the hundreds of eyes on his back, a physical weight pushing him forward. He felt like he was walking through mud. Finally, he reached the curtain. He pushed his way through the thick, heavy fabric, and the bright lights of the stage were gone. He was in the cool, dim darkness of the wings. The air was instantly cooler, and he took a huge, gulping breath like he had been underwater. He could hear the confused, polite rustling from the audience out front. Then, a man's voice. The man with the clipboard, speaking loudly to cover the awkwardness. "Thank you. Thank you, Leo. And now let's welcome contestant number 24. Emily." A small, polite round of applause started, and then it was drowned out by the first confident notes of the next person's song. He had already been forgotten. He was just a brief, awkward pause in the program. He leaned against the cool brick wall of the backstage area, slid down to the floor, and buried his face in his hands. The silence he had left on stage had followed him here, but now it was a different kind of silence. It was a lonely, empty silence, and it was all his own. The darkness backstage was a welcome relief, like a cool cloth on a fever. The boy stayed on the floor, his knees pulled up to his chest, his face buried in the scratchy fabric of his suit pants. The world felt muffled and far away. He could hear the next girl on stage, her music confident and clear. A stark contrast to the horrible silence he had left behind. Each note she played felt like a tiny accusation. "See, this is how it's supposed to be done. Why couldn't you do this?" He didn't move. He just wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole, to take him away from the shame that was burning like a hot coal in his stomach. He didn't know how long he sat there before he heard footsteps. Heavy, purposeful footsteps. He didn't have to look up to know it was his parents. He could feel their presence like a change in the air. A shadow fell over him. He kept his head down, wishing he could become invisible. His mother didn't say a word. There was no sigh of disappointment, no angry whisper. There was just nothing, and her silence was so much louder than any shout could have been. He felt her hands on his shoulders, pulling him gently to his feet. Her touch was stiff, her fingers like little rods of ice. She began to brush off his suit, her movements quick and mechanical, as if she were trying to erase the dirt and the failure from his very clothes. She straightened his collar, smoothed down the lapels, and tugged at his sleeves. She was fixing him, but he felt more broken than ever. His father stepped forward then. He wrapped his arms around the boy's small frame and pulled him into a hug. The boy buried his face in his father's rough jacket, which smelled like coffee in the outside air. It should have been comforting, but he could feel the tension in his father's arms and shoulders. It wasn't a hug of pure comfort. It was a hug of protection, a shield being thrown up against the world, and maybe against his mother. "It's okay, son," his father murmured, his voice low and rumbling in his chest. But it wasn't okay. Nothing was okay. The walk out of the auditorium was a walk of shame. He kept his eyes glued to the shiny marble floor, counting the cracks and scuffs so he wouldn't have to see anyone's face. He could feel the eyes of the other parents and children on him as they passed. Some looked away quickly, a polite gesture of pity. Others stared, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and relief. Thank goodness that wasn't my child. He saw the girl with the long braid who had played so well. She was surrounded by a crowd of smiling adults. He saw the frantic girl from the waiting room who now looked pale and tired. They were all part of this world, a world he had just been violently expelled from. The car ride home was the worst part of the day. The silence inside the car was a living, breathing thing. It filled up every inch of space, pressing in on him from all sides. Outside, the world went on as normal. People walked their dogs, cars honked their horns, music drifted from other vehicles. But inside their car, there was only the quiet hum of the engine and the sound of his own breathing, which seemed too loud in the stillness. He sat in the back, watching his parents in the rear-view mirror. His father stared straight ahead at the road, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. His mother sat perfectly still, looking out the passenger window, her face a blank, unreadable mask. She hadn't spoken a single word to him since they left the stage. Not one. He would have preferred yelling. He would have preferred anything to this cold, heavy quiet. It felt like they were all trapped in a block of ice, and he was the reason it was so cold when they got home. The house felt just as silent and unwelcoming as the car. His mother went straight to the kitchen, and he could hear the sound of cabinets opening and closing, the clatter of dishes. It was the sound of her trying to create normalcy, but it just sounded angry and sharp. His father helped him out of his suit jacket, his movements slow and careful. "Go get ready for bed, champ," he said, his voice gentle but tired. The boy went to his room and changed into his pajamas without a word. He brushed his teeth and climbed into bed, pulling the covers up to his chin. But sleep was a million miles away. His mind kept replaying the scene on the stage, over and over again. The blinding lights, the silent, watching crowd, the look on his mother's face. The shame washed over him again, hot and suffocating. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to make the pictures go away, but they were burned into the back of his eyelids. After what felt like hours, he heard the soft click of his bedroom door closing. The house was finally still. But then, from downstairs, he heard voices. They were speaking in hushed, urgent whispers, but in the dead silence of the night. The sound traveled up the stairs and through his door as clear as a bell. It was his parents. He shouldn't listen. He knew he shouldn't, but he couldn't help himself. He slipped out of bed and crept to his door, pressing his ear against the cool wood. It was his father's voice first, and it was strained. "Margaret, you have to talk to him." He was using his mother's name, a name he only used when he was serious. "You can't just ignore him. He's just a boy. He's 8 years old." There was a pause, and then his mother's voice, thin and tight. "What am I supposed to say, Robert? Good job freezing in front of 300 people. Nice work, embarrassing us both." "He wasn't embarrassing us," his father said, his voice rising a little in frustration. He was terrified. "You're pushing him too hard. You've been pushing him too hard for a year. He doesn't even enjoy it anymore. Did you see his face today? That wasn't the face of a boy who loves music. That was the face of a prisoner. Does love it. He has a gift." His mother shot back, and her voice cracked on the last word. There was a new sound in it now. Not anger, but a deep, shaking pain. "You don't understand. I'm trying to give him everything I never had. Do you remember that old beat-up upright I had to play on? The one with the sticky keys? I would have given anything for a real piano, for lessons, for a chance. Just one chance to play on a stage like that? I'm not trying to hurt him. I'm trying to save him from having the same regrets I do. From looking back when he's 40 and wishing he'd just tried a little harder. The boy held his breath, his hand pressed flat against the door. He had never heard his mother talk like this before. But you're not giving him a chance, his father said, his voice softening. You're taking it away. You're taking his music and replacing it with yours. He doesn't play for fun anymore. He plays because he's afraid of you. There was a long silence then, a silence that was even heavier than the one in the car, and then he heard it. A sound he had never heard in his entire life. It was a small, choked sob. It was his mother. I know, she whispered, and her voice was broken, shattered into 1,000 tiny pieces. Oh, God, Robert, I know. I see it now. I see his face. All I wanted was to give him the world, and I think I just broke him instead. The boy leaned his forehead against the door, his own eyes now filling with hot tears. But they weren't tears of shame anymore. They were tears of understanding. In that moment, the heavy weight on his chest didn't disappear, but it changed. It was no longer just his failure to carry. It was a shared sadness. He saw his mother not as a demanding taskmaster, but as a little girl who once dreamed of playing a piano that didn't work. He saw her own broken dreams, and he understood that she hadn't been trying to hurt him. She had been trying to fix herself. The failure on the stage wasn't just his anymore. It belonged to both of them. And for the first time all day, he didn't feel alone. The week that followed was the quietest week the boy had ever known. The silence in the house was different now. It wasn't the angry, heavy silence from the car ride home, and it wasn't the empty, lonely silence of his bedroom. It was a fragile, careful silence, like everyone was walking on thin ice, afraid of making a sound that might crack it wide open again. The piano in the living room sat with its lid closed, a silent black monument to his failure. He avoided it at all costs, walking around it as if it were a sleeping animal that might wake up and bite him. His mother avoided it too. She would walk past it without even a glance, her eyes fixed on something else in the room. But things were different between them. The tension that had lived in the space between their bodies for months was gone. In its place was a new, gentle sadness. She didn't make him practice. She didn't even mention the piano. Instead, she started doing small, quiet things. One morning, he came down to breakfast and found that she had made his favorite pancakes. The kind with chocolate chips inside, a special treat she usually only made on birthdays. She placed the plate in front of him without a word, just a small, tired smile. Another afternoon, he was sitting on the floor, drawing a picture of a spaceship. She came and sat next to him, not to tell him to practice, but just to watch. After a few minutes, she reached out and gently smoothed his hair, her fingers lingering for a second on his head. It was a small gesture, but it felt huge. It was an apology without words. He understood. He would lean his head against her arm for a moment, a silent acceptance. They were a team again, but a different kind of team. A team that had lost a big game and was learning how to be okay with it. His father seemed to breathe easier. The worried look on his face softened. He would come home from work, and the three of them would watch a movie together, sharing a big bowl of popcorn on the sofa. It was normal, but it was a new kind of normal. A softer one. The boy felt a sense of relief so deep it was almost like sadness. The pressure was gone. The mountain of expectations had crumbled, and while the view from the wreckage was a little sad, it was also open and free. He could finally breathe. Then came the rainy Saturday. It wasn't a gentle, misty rain. It was a downpour. The kind of rain that beats against the windows and makes the whole world feel gray and small. His friends weren't playing baseball today. The park was empty and muddy. He was bored. He'd built a fort out of pillows, he'd read all his comics twice, and he'd driven his toy cars into every imaginable collision under the sofa. He was wandering aimlessly around the living room, feeling the familiar restlessness that a rainy day brings to a child who is used to being outside. And then, he found himself standing in front of the piano. He hadn't meant to walk over there. His feet had just carried him. He looked at it. The polished black wood was dull in the gray light coming from the window. It didn't look like a monster anymore. It didn't look like a symbol of his mother's broken dreams or his own public failure. It just looked like a piece of furniture, a big, quiet wooden box full of strings and hammers. He thought about what it felt like to sit on that stage, the silence pressing down on him, the music gone from his head. The memory still made his stomach feel tight, but it didn't burn with shame anymore. It just felt like a story someone had told him about a different boy. His mother was in her armchair in the corner, reading a book. She hadn't noticed him. She was lost in her own world. He looked at the closed lid. He thought about the sound it made when you lifted it, a soft, satisfying thump. He thought about the feel of the cool, smooth keys under his fingers. He was curious. What would it feel like now? With no pressure, no audience, no expectations. Just him and the keys. Slowly, carefully, he reached out and lifted the lid. It made a soft sound, and his mother looked up from her book. Their eyes met for a second. There was no alarm in her face, no sudden hope, just a quiet, watchful look. She didn't say anything. She just went back to her book, but he knew she was listening. He could feel it. He sat down on the bench. It felt the same, hard and cold. He placed his hands on the keys, but he didn't position them for the sonatina. He didn't even think about that song. That song belonged to a different life. Instead, he just let his fingers rest on the cool ivory for a moment. He took a breath, but this time, it wasn't a nervous, shaky breath. It was just a breath. He started to play. It wasn't a song he'd learned from a book. It was a simple little melody he'd heard that morning on a cartoon. It was a happy, bouncy tune about a squirrel trying to find a nut. His fingers found the notes slowly, hesitantly. He made mistakes. He hit a wrong note, a sour, clashing sound that would have made his old self wince. But now he just paused, found the right note, and kept going. The music was not perfect. It was slow in some parts and clumsy in others. It was full of the small hesitations and corrections of a person who is figuring something out as they go. But it was his. It was the first time in a long time. He was playing something just because he wanted to. He wasn't playing for a judge. He wasn't playing for his mother. He wasn't playing to prove anything. He was just playing. The sound of the notes filled the quiet room, not like a performance, but like a conversation. He was talking to the piano, and for the first time, it was talking back. He added a little flourish here, a little extra note there, just because it felt right. It wasn't technically correct, but it felt true. It sounded like sunshine, even on a rainy day. It sounded like the feeling of running through a sprinkler. It sounded like freedom. He played the little tune through once, then started again, this time with a little more confidence. He was so focused on the keys, on the simple joy of making the music, that he almost forgot his mother was in the room. But then he heard a very small sound. He stopped playing and looked over at her. Her book was resting in her lap, forgotten. She was looking right at him, and her face was changed completely. The tension was gone. The sadness was gone. All that was left was a soft, open expression of wonder. And from the corner of her eye, a single tear was tracing a slow, glistening path down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness or disappointment. It was a tear of release, of understanding, of a love so deep it had finally broken through the hard shell of her own ambition. She didn't wipe it away. She just let it fall. She didn't say, "That's beautiful," or "You should practice that one." She didn't say anything at all. She just looked at him, and in her eyes, he saw that she was finally hearing his music, not the music she wished he would play. The boy looked back at the piano, at his own small hands resting on the keys. He smiled a real, genuine smile, the first one he'd felt in a very long time. He turned back to the piano and began to play the little squirrel song again, this time a little louder, a little brighter. The silence that had once filled the room was finally, truly broken. And in its place was a new kind of quiet, a peaceful, shared quiet, filled with the simple, imperfect, and utterly beautiful sound of a boy finding his own way home.